Welcome to the Pencil Bob channel. I hope you enjoy my stories. Please like and subscribe, and hit that notification icon so you never miss out. Now on with the stories.
HOA tried to stop me from getting solar panels. This initially started 3 years ago. I wanted to get solar panels for my house since I had moved in, and it was brought to my attention the nice tax credits you get for the panels, and that the amount at the time was going down with each passing year, so delaying was effectively leaving money on the table. I got a contractor out to give me a quote. I agreed, and we moved on to submitting the request to the HOA. Of course, they denied the request despite there being no rules against roof solar panels in our bylaws. When pushed on this, the reasons they gave were complete bullshit, and a simple Google search would prove it. Finally, they landed on they're not aesthetically pleasing. I told them at the yearly board meeting about a law being pushed through in the state that would make it illegal for HOAs to ban solar panels, and that they should put on hold any actions until that bill was brought to the floor. They agreed. Less than a week later, I get a letter in the mail demanding I take the panels down or they will take me to court. I can only assume they thought I was bullshitting about the new law. At this point, I was pissed and not going to take this laying down. It got to the point where a local news station ended up doing a story on me and my dispute with the HOA. The news story got a surprising amount of traction, and I ended up being contacted by a bunch of people wanting to show support. Things escalated further, and lawyers got involved. My lawyer ends up setting up a meeting with the board and their lawyer, and it was clear the board was not taking this seriously, and had no intention of talking on good faith. They wanted this meeting to take place at a feeing Starbucks for F's sake. The meeting ends up happening at a more private location, and the news story comes in clutch because not only did it get me support, but it got me in contact with the guy co-authoring the new solar bill, and this guy offers to join the upcoming meeting. Fast forward to the date of the meeting. Of course, each and every board member that shows up is late by at least 10 minutes. And to top it all off, with the exception of one, they are all boomers. They are all extremely rude and combative with me. It's clear they think this is a waste of time and have no intention of negotiating in good faith. This one old effer wags his goddamned finger at me like I was a petulant child. Granted, I'm in my late 20s at the time. They start off this meeting going on and on about how kids these days have no respect for authority and how this isn't going to fly, blah blah blah. It was clear they had made up their minds, and they were only here because they had to be. Now, I'm going to take you back in time just a little bit before this meeting began. I was speaking with co-author of the bill, we'll call him Jay, and my lawyer on how to play this meeting. We knew full well they'd act the way they did. My lawyer told me to just let them dig a hole for themselves, and then he'd play our ace, said Ace, being the new bill being brought to the floor with a majority already pledged to sign off on it. So back to the meeting. After an exhausting 38 minutes of these entitled old shits going on and on, my lawyer clears his throat and calmly slides the paper with the bill's information and when the next vote will be held across the table, and explains to them with the slightest hint of shit-eating smug that yes, at this point in time, you could force my client to remove his panels. However, as you can see here, this bill will be going up for a vote very soon and has the needed support to pass, at which point it will be illegal for you to ban his panels. And if you go down that road, when this bill passes, we will file a suit for the labor costs of removing, reinstallation, loss in power generated, and of course the mental toll you've caused through this ultimately pointless endeavor. I know which path I would choose. The slack-jaw looks on their faces were effing priceless. You could hear a pin drop, it was so quiet. They then lean back behind their lawyer talking in hushed whispers. And suddenly it's all smiles and respect and just wanting to get an agreement signed and get this whole thing wrapped up. Fast forward, the bill passes, I got the papers I need and I couldn't be happier with my solar panels. And the cherry on top, I've not had a single letter from the HOA since. Not a one. Even for things I know I should. They've had free rein for years of just pushing people around and people taking it. I think I'm the first to have dagged them on and won. Pretty sure I scared them. I'm the young pup, as they put it. But no, I would say a better comparison is I'm the bear that wants to be left alone. And those decrepit old Fs poked the bear and got bit. Edit for the record, I went into this entire situation wanting to actually work with these people in good faith. The moment someone starts acting like some misbegotten cockwaffle, I don't care what their age, background, political ideology, etc. is. I will fire back and I will go for the throat. Call me whatever you want. doesn't change the fact of what happened nor my views on people like those HOA badgers. I don't know where you are, but I think I used your case in an argument with my board about panels about 5 years ago. If it wasn't yours, it was very similar. Unfortunately, our state law does allow the HOAs to demand hold harmless agreements on any roof damage, and I didn't like the they proposed, so never did the panels. Fast forward a couple of years and the board turns over and the new board president sells solar panel installations. Now no is necessary in our units. A group of us threatened to sue our HOA and they laughed in our faces. So we did, and they immediately folded. Found out later they'd never actually had someone go through with their threat of legal action. Word got out and the illusion was shattered, and the board changed over a year as all the old guard quit. We have a new breed of crazy now, but slightly better. My neighborhood was built in the 80s, a typical suburban development with neatly arranged houses and well-manicured lawns. When it was built, the building company gave the first owners a draft of bylaws for a homeowners association. Without much thought or concern, these bylaws were put into effect, and the HOA elected officers. However, there was an important thing missing. The HOA had no real power whatsoever. There were lists of violations and rules for collecting fees, but nowhere in the document was the HOA given the power to take action against offenders. They couldn't even put a lien on your house for failing to pay dues. The HOA dues have been fixed at $50 a year since then. The common patches of grass are maintained, the streets are plowed when it snows. There is a clean and beautiful sign for the neighborhood at the front entrance, and every year there is an Easter egg hunt. And that's it. Several houses have not paid their dues since the 80s, and the HOA has done everything in their power to collect, which is nothing at all. It's well known in the neighborhood that a few houses were bought by a rental company that doesn't pay dues and doesn't interact with the HOA at all. My neighbor Jim wanted to extend his driveway to accommodate his growing collection of vehicles. He sent a letter asking for permission since the concrete company would not work without HOA approval. The HOA responded, saying that the extended driveway was against the bylaws, but they would not seek any action, legal or otherwise, against Jim or the concrete company, since they were powerless to do so. Jim went ahead with his driveway extension without any further hassle. This incident highlighted the impotence of our HOA, but also its practical approach to non-enforcement. But now we come to my problem. A company is bringing fiber internet to our neighborhood, but they need to run cable through the HOA land at the entrance to the neighborhood and install a junction box. The company wants $1,000 to do this. The salesman I spoke to said normally the company eats the cost, but out of the entire 250-house neighborhood, only 3 signed up saying they wanted the fiber internet, so they can't justify the cost. The HOA gave their usual response. Per the bylaws, this is not allowed, but they will not stop us or in any way take action against us. However, the HOA has been at a financial deficit since the 90s. Traditionally, the president makes up for this shortfall, but the current president is disinclined to pay for this service out of pocket unless a vote is cast for it. I was advised to speak at the next meeting and present a proposal to use HOA funds to pay for the expansion, but it requires a 60% participation in a vote to ratify. In the history of the HOA, no more than 12% of the houses have ever been present at a meeting. At the next meeting, I stood up and made my case for the fiber internet. I pointed out the benefits: faster speeds, increased property values, and the modern necessity of reliable internet. I explained how the $1,000 cost could be covered if just a fraction of the homeowners chipped in. But the only realistic way to cover it was through HOA funds. The response was a mix of nodding heads and indifferent shrugs. When it came time to vote, predictably, less than 20 people showed up, representing only 8% of the neighborhood. Despite my best efforts to rally the community, the proposal was dead on arrival. Without the required participation, the vote couldn't proceed. Feeling defeated, I left the meeting wondering what more I could do. I talked to some neighbors afterwards, trying to drum up support, but most were either apathetic or unwilling to invest in something they didn't see immediate value in. A few days later, I received a letter from the HOA. It stated that since the proposal had failed, any further attempts to install the fiber internet without explicit permission would be considered a violation of the bylaws. They couldn't enforce it, of course, but it was a stark reminder of the bureaucracy and the limitations we were facing. The company also sent me a notice saying they couldn't move forward with the installation unless the HOA formally approved it. Feeling trapped, I reached out to the company again, but they stood firm on their decision. With only 3 houses signed up, they couldn't justify the expense. The neighbors who had initially shown interest began to lose hope, and some even backed out, fearing potential conflict with the HOA despite its lack of real power. The situation grew more frustrating as time went on. The lack of high-speed internet was more than just an inconvenience. It was affecting my work and my kids' school projects. I tried to get a few more neighbors on board by explaining the benefits in more detail, but most were indifferent or skeptical, especially after the failed vote. Meanwhile, the HOA's financial situation worsened. The president could no longer cover the deficit out of pocket, and the minimal dues collected were barely enough to maintain the basics. The common areas started to look neglected, and the streets weren't plowed as promptly as before. The beautiful sign at the entrance began to fade and chip, reflecting the overall decline in our neighborhood's upkeep. As the months passed, the lack of progress took a toll on me personally. I found myself increasingly frustrated and bitter, not just at the HOA, but at my neighbors' apathy. It seemed like no one cared about improving our situation, and I felt alone in my efforts. The strained relationships with my neighbors made community events awkward. The once cheerful Easter egg hunts and neighborhood gatherings were now overshadowed by the underlying tension. People avoided discussing the HOA issues, and there was a noticeable divide between those who supported the fiber internet initiative and those who didn't care or were actively against it. One evening, I received a call from the fiber internet company. They informed me that due to the continued lack of interest and the complications with the HOA, they had decided to pull out of our neighborhood entirely. They wouldn't be offering their services here in the foreseeable future. This was the final blow. All my efforts, meetings, and attempts to rally support had been for nothing. I felt a mix of anger and resignation. The reality was that our powerless HOA had, in its own way, managed to stifle progress. The bylaws, the lack of enforcement power, and the general apathy of the residents had created an environment where positive change was nearly impossible. The lack of high-speed internet wasn't just a personal inconvenience, it was a major setback for our household. My job relied heavily on a stable internet connection, and my kids needed it for their schoolwork. We were left struggling with slow speeds and constant interruptions, making everyday tasks frustrating and inefficient. Our neighborhood, once a promising and vibrant community, was now struggling to maintain even the basics. The common areas continued to deteriorate, and the streets remained in disrepair. The once beautiful sign at the entrance was now a sad reminder of what our neighborhood used to be. The experience taught me a lot about community dynamics and the importance of collective action. It also highlighted the limitations of relying on an ineffective HOA. While I understand the desire to avoid strict enforcement and heavy-handed rules, the lack of any real authority has left us in a bind. If there's one thing I've learned from this experience, it's that an HOA without power is almost worse than no HOA at all. The illusion of structure and governance without the ability to enforce or improve anything creates frustration and apathy. Our neighborhood, once a promising and vibrant community, is now struggling to maintain even the basics. I wish I had a more positive ending to share, but the reality is that not every story has a happy conclusion. Sometimes, despite your best efforts, you find yourself facing an insurmountable wall of indifference and bureaucracy. My hope is that others can learn from our experience and understand the importance of a functional, empowered HOA that truly serves the community's best interests.
I would like to thank you for watching the video to the end. To encourage us to make more videos, please like, subscribe, comment, as well as share. Check out this other video if you haven't already.